Liberal Viewer presents.
So, welcome to the April 10th edition of Liberal Viewer Monday Meeting Mix-Up. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the dozen best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, although CBS Face the Nation was preempted by golf, which I guess is more important than all the topics you're going to see covered by the other shows. I don't really think so, but I'm not a big fan of golf. Maybe there are golf fans in the audience. You can explain to me why Face the Nation should be preempted for golf. But anyway, those four are the so-called corporate news media here in the United States. I actually have a clip from Right Side Broadcasting Network, which is a YouTube channel. Sometimes I watch Trump rallies on because they have good live coverage of Trump rallies. But that's the second clip. In fact, all the clips are summarized briefly down in the video description, all 12 clips, so you can see what's coming up. I've also put all the sources, including a link to the Right Side Broadcasting Network channel on YouTube if that's something you really want to watch, although it's like Fox News, if like Fox News were the liberal station, that's when it's like Newsmax, One America News, and Right Side News Broadcasting or Network Broadcasting or whatever. But I'm getting ahead of myself because I haven't even told you what the topic is for my fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you today. But you can see it in the video title. It's Radical Trump Judge Outlaws Most U.S. Abortions This Week. Because there's this judge in Amarillo, Texas, Matthew Kaczmarek, where he's the only federal judge that you get if you file a suit in Amarillo, Texas, which is why this suit was filed there, because he's this radical Trump judge who is totally ignoring the law and possibly outlawing most of the abortions performed in the United States are performed with pills, not surgically or whatever, not with a procedure. They just use these two pills, mifepristone and misoprostol. And he's saying he's going to outlaw the mifepristone, even though it's safer than Tylenol. Although that's what they keep saying on the liberal or more journalistic news stations. They point, well, I don't know, on MSNBC they always point out it's more. Well, they also say Viagra, but safer than Tylenol, which Tylenol actually isn't all that safe. If you take too much, it can like destroy your liver. So I don't know if but actually, misoprostone and misoprostol are very safe for performing abortions and are certainly safer than continuing a pregnancy for the pregnant woman, because it's always dangerous to be pregnant. There are all sorts of risks of injury and even death. And anyway, I will get to that topic, and I'll show you some newsmaker clips, some panel discussions talking about the fact, I was saying more than half of abortions in the United States are performed using this two-pill combo. Now, they can still use the second pill. It's just several percentage points less effective to do just the misoprostol and not the mifepristone. And anyway, I'll get to all that. But I do want to give you political comedy. And the political comedy is actually on the topic that I covered in a special media mix-up on Wednesday. And I put a link right under the video description if you didn't see it. I did some really good legal analysis, I think, especially like 52 minutes in. I gave my own theory on the statute of limitations not having run, that I haven't seen that analysis anywhere else. And it's like, actually, I think it's pretty accurate. So you can check that out after you watch this live stream, if you haven't watched it already. And the political comedy clip I've chosen is on the topic of Trump charged with 34 felonies in New York, kind of. It's Trump comparing himself to Jesus is a parody, sort of, on Saturday Night Live. The cold open, they did this Easter Last Supper thing with Jesus, and then, well, you'll see. I'll talk about that a little more and even criticize it a little after we watch that political comedy clip. Well, one of two political comedy clips for today together over here.
And though I have committed no crime, I will be arrested, tried, and found guilty.
Sound familiar? Thank you so much. A famous, wonderful man arrested for no reason at all. If you haven't put it together, folks, I'm comparing myself to Jesus again. And what better time than on his birthday, Easter? As we speak, I am being persecuted on a level the likes of which the world has never seen. Even worse than the late, great Jesus. You know, many people are saying we're very similar. We're both very tall, very popular, and both, frankly, white Americans.
You'd be surprised how many conservatives out in the United States think that Jesus was an American. I don't know, and not just Mormons, where the Church of Latter-day Saints actually has Jesus kind of as an American, but that's not what Donald Trump was saying, or that was kind of one of the jokes, which is kind of funny, and I like the joke about Easter being Jesus's birthday because that's the kind of thing Trump might actually say. But uh, I have two criticisms. One, I've talked about James Austin Johnson he does a much more accurate impression than Alec Baldwin did, but somehow by being too close to the truth, it's not as like comical, cartoonish. In some ways, I thought Alec Baldwin was funnier, even though a much less accurate impression. And then I guess Saturday Night Live has this problem with, the parody. I mean, is it really parody when there's like that's actually going on in the real world? I can't remember whether Trump compared himself to Jesus or not, but on the right side broadcasting network's coverage of Trump's arraignment last Wednesday, because of all the protesters yelling at Marjorie Taylor-Green, they had their uh, their correspondent Brian Glenn sort of interview Marjorie Taylor-Green. There's like no pushback when she compares him to Jesus and Nelson Mandela. So was Saturday Night Live really parody? You'll see him nod when she says, Jesus was arrested, and he nods, and then at the end, his only pushback or cross examination is, well, a lot of our viewers agree with you, which apparently is their business model, which I will talk about a little more after we watch that brief clip together over here.
Just think about this. President Trump is joining some of the most incredible people in history being arrested today. Nelson Mandela was arrested, served time in prison. Jesus was arrested and murdered by the Roman government. There have been many people throughout history that have been arrested and persecuted by radical, corrupt governments. And it's beginning today in New York City. And I just can't believe it's happening, but I'll always support him. He's done nothing wrong. He's done everything right.
And I think a lot of our viewers feel the same way, as they are very supportive of the president. Okay, so you're
Is that journalism? That is not journalism. That is, I guess, right side broadcasting network, which means everything they're doing isn't on, not right as in correct, but right as in conservative or pro-Trump or part of the Trump cult, or I don't know. I am highly critical of that interview just because if you're going to, at least Leslie Stahl in the 60 Minutes interview asked some tough questions. There was nothing tough about that. And anyway, that is pretty much the extent of my coverage of Trump's arraignment on Wednesday, because like I said, I did do an entire live stream on that where I think I did some pretty good legal analysis at the link right under the video description. If you want to see that, it was covered on all of the news shows because it happened, between last Sunday and yesterday, when the Sunday morning news analysis shows to try to cover like the most important news of the week. But the longest news summary this week was from Fox News Sunday, the non-journalistic outlet that was really created to be a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party by Roger Ailes. If you read the book The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman. And this week they mentioned briefly the arraignment of Donald Trump in the teaser that comes before the news summary I'm about to show you. But then they had the host Shannon Bream and two reporters, and it's totally on foreign policy. Nothing about mifepristone and the Texas judge. I am going to show you a couple, pretty much their entire discussion of the Texas judge possibly outlawing most of the abortions in the United States, but it's not in their news summary here. Trump's arraignment not there. It's all foreign policy. Fox News has been fixating on the mistakes Biden made in his withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I guess Biden's National Security Council put out a 12 or 13-page report this week where they blamed most of the problems on the conditions they inherited from the Trump negotiation with the Taliban, where he had already negotiated the withdrawal. And I don't know whether that's a good excuse or not. I'm sure some of you will tell me in the comment section if you think it is. But my point is that, the post-mortem analysis of the Biden administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan, was that the most important story last week? And then there's some stuff going on with China, mostly with Republicans. Well, there's a congressional delegation that went to Taiwan, and then the president of Taiwan met with Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House. But I remember Ronald Reagan. He met with the president of Taiwan at the Ronald Reagan Library in Simi Valley. And, if Fox News covered Ronald Reagan like they covered Joe Biden in this news summary, they would always be talking about all the Marines who died in Lebanon, and then Reagan pulled out of Lebanon and ran away. That was one of the big things that happened in the Reagan administration. A lot more U.S. service people died in the bombing of the barracks in Lebanon that happened in the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And at least Joe Biden ended that war, which a lot of people thought should have been ended long ago. But anyway, I'm doing too much pre-criticizing, but I think you get the point as to Fox News Sunday news summary being totally different from the other three I'm going to show you. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. The Biden administration admitting there were some missteps during the withdrawal from Afghanistan that left 13 U.S. service members dead, but assigning much of the blame elsewhere. A report by the National Security Council summarizing the administration's assessment blames the chaotic pullout in August 2021 on decisions made during former President Trump's administration. Republicans who demanded the documents are strongly condemning the report. And as tensions with China boil over, a top lawmaker on Capitol Hill now says the U.S. would consider sending troops to the self-governed island democracy of Taiwan if China dared invade. In a moment, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham will join us with his take on both of those stories. But we begin with team coverage. Alexandria Hoff at the White House on the reaction to the Afghanistan withdrawal review. But first to Asha Hasnie live in Taipei, Taiwan, where a bipartisan congressional delegation has spent several days. Asha.
Shannon, good morning to you. There is a very tense situation unfolding right now about 50 miles away in the Taiwan Strait. Reuters is reporting there's about 20 naval vessels, about half Chinese, half Taiwanese, that are reportedly caught locked up in a, quote, standoff just near the median line. Now, as you know, this is the second day of military drills by the CCP. A whopping 70 aircraft, Chinese aircraft, were detected just today. Half of those crossed the median line. The military also simulating precision strikes against Taiwan this weekend. All of this in reaction to historic events this week between the U.S. and Taiwan.
U.S. lawmakers standing firm with Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen during a tour through the Pacific to rally ally support for the tiny island under the threat of communist China.
Not since World War II have we seen such a struggle for the global balance of power.
House Foreign Affairs Chairman Michael McCaul telling Fox the goal is deterring an invasion. But if it happened, sending U.S. troops is not out of the question.
So you're saying that the option to authorize war powers is on the table?
Communist China invaded Taiwan. It would certainly be on the table and something that would be discussed by Congress.
That warning to China fresh off the heels of a highly anticipated meeting between Tsai and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on U.S. soil.
Our bond is stronger now than at any time or point in my lifetime.
China's People's Liberation Army launching 3 days of military drills in response, conducting exercises with fighter jets and warships. Taiwan is China's red line, the leading maker of advanced chips around the world. China hosting French President Emmanuel Macron this week, who has so far failed to convince President Xi to change his stance on the war on Ukraine, as Russia formally charges Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich with espionage. Senate leaders Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell putting politics aside to jointly condemn Gershkovich's arrest and demand his release.
And back to that reported standoff happening right now in the Taiwan Strait. A spokesperson for the American Institute in Taiwan tells Fox News they are monitoring Beijing's actions closely and that there is no reason for Beijing to overreact. Shannon.
Asha Hasnie reporting from Taipei. Safe travels, Aisha. Thank you very much. Now let's turn to Alexandria Hoff live at the White House on the administration's review of the Afghanistan withdrawal. A lot of mixed reaction, Alex.
Yeah, that's right, Shannon. And this summary is indeed the White House reflecting on its own decisions. This was not an independent review. Now, the State Department and Department of Defense, they provided separate reviews to Congress on Thursday. Those will not be released publicly.
In 12 pages, the Biden administration released its first assessment of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, placing a majority of the blame on former President Trump's prior exit plan. Quote, President Biden's choices for how to execute a withdrawal from Afghanistan were severely constrained by conditions created by his predecessor. The report also admitted that intelligence surrounding the situation was inaccurate.
The president repeatedly requested assessments of the trajectory of the conflict from his military and his intelligence professionals. No agency predicted a Taliban takeover in 9 days.
The end of America's 20-year presence in the country launched those left behind into desperation. A bombing attack at Kabul's air base killed 13 U.S. service members, all as the Taliban took swift control. But the White House's John Kirby disagrees with calling it chaotic.
I just won't buy the whole argument of chaos. It was tough in the first few hours. You would expect it to be. There was nobody at the airport.
Now, the new House Republican majority, they see it very differently. They are investigating on their own and call the withdrawal a, quote, unmitigated national security and humanitarian disaster. President Biden departed the White House around the same time that this report was released to spend the Easter weekend at Camp David. Shannon.
Alexandria Hoff from the White House. Thanks, Alex. Sure. Joining me now, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. Welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
And I will have a clip of Senator Lindsey Graham getting no cross-examination from Shannon Bream on the question of abortion and the misoprostol, or the outlawing of mifepristone, possibly by this judge in Texas. Very little cross-examination, but you notice that topic didn't even come up in the news summary. I mean, the increasing conflict between the U.S. and China, in some ways that could be a more important story historically than some of the things they didn't cover. You know, Trump's arraignment and the abortion ruling and what happened with the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin. And of course, they didn't cover at all the two black legislators in Tennessee who were kicked out of the legislature for participating in a gun control protest. And one of them, I just saw that, well, that'll be covered in most of these other news summaries. I think Meet the Press had the longest of the news summaries, probably the best. I think it may be the only one that in the news summary mentions that a majority of U.S. abortions are done with these pills, and one of the pills might be outlawed by Friday. Like, majority of U.S. abortions, that's like the headline. I put it in the headline of my video, or the title of my video. Did not get as much play as I thought it should, but it did get mentioned at least by Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press in their news summary over here.
And a good Sunday morning. Happy Easter, Passover, and Ramadan. The spring holidays are here. Pope Francis presided over a crowded mass this morning in Vatican City, St. Peter's Square. He's, of course, in a wheelchair right now after his release from the hospital a week ago. But he did ride through the crowd on this Easter Sunday morning to the cheers of many. But despite the celebrations this morning, let's be honest, this was no ordinary holiday week. In fact, come November of 2024, we may look back at this week as one of the most consequential to the future of the Republican Party and to our overall electoral politics. From the dueling abortion rulings Friday night to overt partisan warfare in Tennessee, ironically, the least consequential event may very well be the former president's legal troubles, at least the Manhattan case, though it's still important, obviously. But what's happened this week in Texas, in that courtroom, in Wisconsin at that ballot box, and in Tennessee in that state house, may reverberate the most in our political culture as a widening divide corrodes our institutions, from our state houses to the courts. The national divide was crystallized on Friday night in those dueling abortion rulings, less than an hour apart, on specifically the abortion pill over the federal judges. These are legal efforts that were pushed by political activists seeking a decision by the Supreme Court. There was no actual medical event, no misuse of this pill to trigger this look at the drug. It was simply political activism. This was a drug that was approved at the end of Bill Clinton's presidency, 4 presidencies ago. In Texas, a federal judge invalidated the FDA approval for the abortion pill mifepristone, which in combination with another drug does account for more than 50% of all abortions in this country. An hour later, it was a judge in Washington state that contradicted the decision, and he called the drug safe and effective and ordered the FDA to make no changes. Obviously, the Supreme Court has to weigh in on this one. But the political divide of the judiciary, which looks very undemocratic these days, is also getting worse on the state level. On Thursday night, in a scene that had echoes of the ugly politics of the 60s, Southern lawmakers in Tennessee did something unprecedented. They expelled 2 black Democratic legislators for taking a gun violence protest over the recent Nashville school shooting to the House floor itself. It was a violation of House rules. But a third legislator, Gloria Johnson, who is white, survived the expulsion vote. Let's be honest, 30 years of aggressive gerrymandering have likely brought us to this moment. In Tennessee, Trump won over 60% of the vote, but Republicans make up more than 75% of the state house. Half of those Republicans didn't face any opposition in 2022, not even from their own party. The Tennessee legislature has also changed the rules on the House floor that essentially stifles and limits dissent. Until this week, only 2 lawmakers in Tennessee had been expelled from the House of Representatives since the 19th century. One for allegations of sexual misconduct, and a second was because somebody was convicted of soliciting a bribe. I'm joined now by the 2 lawmakers who were ousted by the Tennessee House this week, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson. Gentlemen, welcome to Meet the Press. I'm sure this was...
And yeah, Justin Jones has already been reinstated this afternoon by his local, I think it's city council or some sort of municipal council that is in charge of appointing the person to take his place until there's a special election. And they've already reappointed Justin Jones, and I don't think he's even going to miss any of the session. So it was like that whole thing with the Tennessee legislature. As Chuck Todd explained, they're expelling these 2 young black men for being like too angry or too protesty or not following decorum or whatever. That like totally gave them a national platform. It was, I mean, it couldn't have been a more stupid, politically more stupid move by the Tennessee legislature. And I think one of the reasons is because it might not be politically stupid for them politically in Tennessee, but for the Republican Party nationally, it just plays into, you know, they kicked out these 2 young black men, but left the white woman there, which maybe wasn't for racist reasons, but just it looks so racist. And that's probably why you didn't hear them covering it on the Fox News Sunday news summary. But Chuck Todd gave that, talked about that, talked a little bit about the arraignment of Donald Trump, and also talked about the abortion ruling from this Texas judge. And like I said before I showed the clip, I think might have been the only one of the news shows on Sunday that mentioned that it was a majority of abortions performed in the United States are using mifepristone and misoprostol. And it is at least something that was covered in the other 2 news summaries I'm going to show you. Like I said, there's no CBS News Face the Nation this week, so we're already halfway through the news summaries. ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, hosted by Jon Karl this week, talked about all 3 of the issues that you saw from Meet the Press. but it concentrated a lot more on the arraignment of Donald Trump, and I think that's because two of their exclusive guests, this is a bias I've talked about that all the news media has, where they, in their news reporting, they have a bias towards reporting about news that involves their exclusive guests on the show, and the exclusive guests on ABC's This Week were Jim Trusty, the one of the former President Trump's lawyers, and then Bill Barr, who was one attorney general till almost the end of the Trump administration. So that might be why they concentrate more on Trump's arraignment and his other legal troubles. And I'll talk about that news summary a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. It's been a hugely consequential week in American politics. A major ruling in Texas to ban the abortion pill. In Tennessee, 2 young black lawmakers expelled from the State House of Representatives after they took a stand on gun violence. But we begin with history made in New York. Donald Trump becoming the first former president of the United States to be indicted. Republicans denounced the charges as weak and politically motivated, some of them saying the backlash will be so intense that Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg effectively guaranteed Trump the Republican nomination in 2024. Trump was uncharacteristically quiet as he was arraigned in New York last week, but a few hours later in Mar-a-Lago, we saw him attacking this prosecutor and the others still investigating him, a message now central to his presidential campaign.
The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it.
But a new ABC News Ipsos poll this morning suggests the charges may already be hurting Trump politically. A majority saying they think the former president intentionally did something illegally, compared to just 20% who say he did nothing wrong. Now just 25% of Americans view Trump favorably. And there is likely more to come on matters more serious than anything arising out of hush money payments to an adult film star. There's the Georgia election case, the special counsel investigations into classified documents, and January 6th. Decisions on whether to indict are expected on all of them by the start of summer. All of that raising the possibility of court appearances and trials playing out as voters cast their ballots in the primaries next year. Joining us now is one of Donald Trump's attorneys, Jim Trusty. Mr. Trusty, thank you.
I don't know about you, but the name Jim Trusty as a lawyer for Donald Trump seems a little bit too much on the nose for me or whatever. It's like, that would be like the name of a con man in a cartoon. I don't know, maybe like the Scooby-Doo cartoons where like he's the con man who was thwarted by the the mystery machine or whatever, the Scooby-Doo, and he would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you meddling kids or whatever. I don't know. That's what I think of when I hear Jim Trusty. And actually his, I'm not going to show you anything from that because, like I said, I'm not really covering the Trump arraignment and his legal troubles this week. I've covered it the last couple weeks in a special Wednesday live stream that if you're really interested, and I recommend it, you can click through the link in the video description. Before I get to the last news summary, I did notice I got a couple super chat contributions. One from Lulu Girl, who said she had to leave, but gave me a nice super chat contribution, and then Persuasive Barrier also. I saw both those earlier. I really appreciate that. I saw that this video has already been demonetized by YouTube. I appealed it. I think it might be because the word abortion is in the title, and that is like almost immediate demonetization, whatever. I think I added an extra syllable in there. But anyway, thank you to Lulu Girl and Persuasive Barrier for that support. Down under the video description, right after that link to my Wednesday live stream, you can also see links to become a monthly supporter of mine on Patreon. Those are my most reliable supporters. And then you can also give a one-time contribution through PayPal. Anyone who donates $5 through PayPal or through Patreon gets this ACLU Constitution. I send these out to everyone who gives me $5 and a shipping address, so keep that in mind. And now let me get to the last of the four news summaries. This is CNN's State of the Union, covers the three topics you saw from the other two actual journalistic outlets, the Tennessee legislators expelled, or the three topics, sorry, the Tennessee legislators expelled, the Trump arraignment, and the abortion ruling from this radical Trump Texas judge. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that last briefest news summary together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the state of our union is, wondering what doesn't become politicized these days. We just closed out an especially bitter and divisive week in American politics. On Tuesday, former President Donald Trump was indicted in New York and is vowing vengeance, as it appears possible the case could go to trial months before the presidential election. On Thursday, two Tennessee state lawmakers were expelled by Republicans for protesting in favor of gun restrictions following a mass shooting in a Nashville elementary school. And on Friday, two federal judges split over the future of the medication abortion drug mifepristone. A judge in Texas gave the Biden administration 7 days to appeal his decision, which blocked the FDA's approval of the widely used abortion drug, throwing many women and medical providers into a state of uncertainty. Here with me now is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra.
And that's actually the next clip I'm going to show you is Javier Becerra. I thought the CNN news summary was good for being less than a minute long, and certainly better than the longest news, like the almost 6 minutes from Fox News Sunday, where they did talk about the important increase in tensions with China, the maybe not so important, like, rehash of what happened with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and what was that, like August 2021? That's like almost 2 years ago now. And anyway, but you can tell me which of the four news summaries you think was best. That's why I play them all in a row, longest to shortest. I also saw a super chat contribution from Kettle there. Thank you for that. I appreciate you catching up and being live with us now. And now I'm going to get to the newsmaker clips. Well, and then there are a couple pundit panel discussions. But the first two newsmaker clips are first Javier Becerra being asked by Dana Bash. Oh, the other thing, Dana Bash said that didn't really say the majority of U.S. abortions. That's the closest you saw, though, there from Dana Bash. What was the exact wording she used there with at the beginning of that news summary? Well, hold on. Let me. I actually have all these transcripts in my. Oh, here it is. Yeah, she said, the vast, what would you say, the FDA's for the widely used abortion drug. That's the closest, yeah. Dana Bash said that the mifepristone misoprostol combination is widely used, but it's actually used in a majority of U.S. abortions. And I think Meet the Press was the only one who mentioned that, which was like burying the lead in some ways, if you ask me. But that was the one thing I wanted to point out again about the news summaries before I get to the newsmaker clips, where Dana Bash tried to hold the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra, accountable for, like, what's the Biden administration going to do? Asked him, should women expect not to be able to have medical abortions next week? And didn't really get an answer. And then also talked about this suggestion from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that they engage in agency non-acquiescence, which is basically where federal agencies decide to disobey a federal court order, which I don't think is a great idea. And so I can't really fault Javier Becerra for not answering the question. Well, I mean, maybe he should have said it wasn't a good idea, but you can see his answer, and then I'm going to show you Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez responding to Dana Bash's questioning about what Javier Becerra says in this next clip, in the clip after next. But first, let's watch this CNN State of the Union clip from yesterday together over here.
So this Texas ruling banning mifepristone goes into effect on Friday, unless a stay is issued. The question that women across America have right now is, will they have access to abortion medication after this week?
Well, they certainly have access today, and we intend to do everything to make sure it's available to them, not just in a week, but moving forward, period, because mifepristone is one of the safest and most effective medicines that we've seen over the last 20 years to help women with their health care, especially abortion care. So it is incumbent upon us as a country to make sure women have safe and effective medication available to them.
How are you going to do that?
Well, we've already filed an appeal of this court's ruling. One judge in one court in one state turned upside down the FDA's approval process for safe and effective medications. We have to go to court and seek an appeal.
What happens if the ban is upheld? Will this drug disappear from the market overnight?
So Dana, that's big speculation. First and foremost, when you turn upside down the entire FDA approval process, you're not talking about just mifepristone. You're talking about every kind of drug. You're talking about our vaccines. You're talking about insulin. You're talking about the new Alzheimer's drugs that may come on. If a judge decides to substitute his preference, his personal opinion, for that of scientists and medical professionals, what drug isn't subject to some kind of legal challenge? So we have to go to court, and for America's sake and for women's sake, we have to prevail in this.
My next guest, Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, thinks that the FDA should just ignore the Texas judge's ruling. And, you know, she's not alone. I'm sure you've seen some legal experts argue the FDA does have broad discretion to simply choose not to enforce a ban and allow the drug to remain on the market. So, yes or no, as the HHS Secretary, do you want the FDA to enforce the Texas ruling if it is upheld in the short term?
Yes or no, we want the courts to overturn this reckless decision. Yes or no, we want, that women continue to have access to a drug that's proven itself safe. Millions of women have used this drug around the world, more than 60 countries.
But what if they don't act in the interim before you get to that point in the court?
I got to believe that an appeals court, the Supreme Court, whatever court, has to understand that this ruling by this one judge overturns not just access to mifepristone, but possibly any number of drugs.
What if they don't?
That's speculation that I think is not worth engaging in.
But are you taking it off the table that you will recommend the FDA ignore a ban?
Everything is on the table. The president said that way back when the Dobbs decision came out. Every option is on the table.
So I want to ask about the Supreme Court because you obviously.
So, yeah, I don't know if saying everything is on the table is really an answer. It's more like an evasion, like not ruling anything in, not ruling anything out, wouldn't say, kind of didn't answer. And you'll see in this next clip, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, even though she goes out of her way to say nice things about the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Xavier Becerra, that she then doesn't really like his answer and wants like a more aggressive stance with this agency non-acquiescence thing, which I don't think is a great idea for the federal government to ignore the rulings of federal courts. And the example she brings up is like, well, the Trump administration did it, and that doesn't make me feel much better. And I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Okay. The abortion pill ruling doesn't take effect for 7 days. You just heard me discussing that with Xavier Becerra. The Biden administration is appealing it. Are you satisfied with what you just heard? And what would it mean for women if approval for this pill is revoked nationwide?
Well, you know, I do, while I commend the Biden administration for appealing the decision, and I believe that Secretary Becerra has been doing a phenomenal job in his role, I do think that when it comes to gaming out what the very real possibilities are in the coming days, weeks, and months, this is not just about speculation, but this is about preparation. And the reality of our courts right now is very disturbing. This ruling is an extreme abuse of power. It is an extraordinary example of judicial overreach. The grounds of the ruling are just completely discredited and without grounds. And what we also learned this week is that a Supreme Court justice of this court has been receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gifts and expenses and having lifestyle subsidies by a billionaire who has been funding the same types of judicial organizations that appointed this judge in a partisan ruling in the first place.
I'm going to get to that in a second. I just want to stick with abortion first. And what you just heard me ask the secretary about was something that you called on the Biden administration to do, which is just to simply ignore the court ruling. That's a pretty stunning position if you think about it in the abstract, about the notion of just ignoring a judge's position. So my question is, when this case is resolved by the Supreme Court, should the administration follow that decision if that decision ends up banning this abortion drug?
Well, you know, I want to take a step back and dig into the grounds around ignoring this preliminary ruling as well. There is an extraordinary amount of precedent for this. There is a term known as agency non-acquiescence. And this has been used and for folks saying this is a first, that this is precedent setting. It is not. The Trump administration also did this very thing, but also it has happened before. The idea of consistency in governance until there is a higher court ruling is not an unprecedented thing to happen. In fact, when the Trump administration did it, it was arguably through a much, a very grave issue when it came to DACA. The Trump administration was ordered to fully reinstate DACA, the DACA program, and they, in a complete defiance, did not do that. They rely on, the courts rely on the legitimacy of their rulings. And when they make a mockery of our system, a mockery of our democracy, and a mockery of our law, as what we just saw happen in this mifepristone ruling, then I believe that the executive branch, and we know that the executive branch has an enforcement discretion, especially in light of a contradicting ruling coming out of Washington.
Should that apply if the Supreme Court upholds the Texas judge's decision?
You know, I think one of the things that we need to examine is the grounds of that ruling. But I do not believe that the courts have the authority to have the authority over the FDA that they just asserted. And I do believe that it creates a crisis. Should the Supreme Court do that, it would essentially institute a national abortion ban, because you have an extraordinary amount of states who have implemented surgical bans or bans after very early time periods. And then if you pair that with a mifepristone ban, then we will essentially have a ban on abortion. There are certain workarounds. I will admit there would be certain workarounds, but we would have taken a very significant step towards a national abortion ban. Once you ban medication abortion, which represents, or start banning medication abortion, which represents the overwhelming number of abortions in the United States, then we are in extremely dangerous territory. And I would urge the Supreme Court, in its lawlessness that they are exhibiting right now already, their extraordinary conflict of interest, I mean, my hope would be that we do not get to that point. But if we do, I do believe that we must start to push back on our system of checks and balances, which is designed to push back on should there be an example of judicial tyranny and judicial overreach.
Let's talk more about the Supreme Court and what you mentioned before, which is that Justice Clarence Thomas, you want him to be impeached after a new ProPublica report this week revealed that.
Yeah, and I'm not covering that whole story there that is really disturbing about Clarence Thomas spending like 20 years getting like $500,000 a year worth of like lavish travel expenses paid for by this conservative billionaire Harlan Crow, who apparently collects Nazi memorabilia and whatever. That is like Clarence Thomas. I have always seen him as dishonest. It was before the Anita Hill hearings. I was just finishing up this paralegal training course that I took at UCLA, and what was that? 1991? Is that when I believe that's when Clarence Thomas was nominated. And I remember watching, I was one of the few people, like the whole nation was captivated and watched the Clarence Thomas hearings when he was charged or accused by Anita Hill of sexual harassment. But I'm one of those few people who actually watched I was like at home, unemployed, trying to get a job as a paralegal. I lived in this apartment under the freeway in Los Angeles. I had just taken this paralegal course at UCLA, and I was caught in the George H.W. Bush recession and couldn't find a job. So I had the time to watch the entire Clarence Thomas nomination hearings before the whole Anita Hill thing happened. And I thought he was totally dishonest. Sorry, long story short, he in those original hearings he was asked if he had ever thought about Roe v. Wade or what he thought about Roe v. Wade, even though he like went to law school and he was a lawyer and he was in administrative law and I can't even remember what the agency he used to work for. Was it the EEOC, something like that? But anyway, he said he testified under oath that he had never thought about what, the legitimacy of Roe v. Wade or the abortion ruling, or he had no opinion whatsoever. And that's when I knew that Clarence Thomas was a big liar. And then when the whole Anita Hill thing broke, it was even clearer. And so many things have happened. His wife, Ginny Thomas, was involved in that whole scandal around January 6th, where she was texting with Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, about, Biden's about to be arrested and put on a prison barge off Guantanamo, and you got to make sure this happens, or we got to fight for our whatever. Ginny Thomas was texting, and anyway, the Clarence Thomas is definitely a scandal, and it's a scandal that he's been on the Supreme Court since the early 90s. But the solution that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was talking about, she talked about legislative solutions vaguely at the end, where I agree that we need to basically expand the Supreme Court. That I've talked about that before, that if the Democrats end up controlling the White House, the Senate, and the House ever again, and they should have done this before they lost the House. They should have just like gotten rid of the filibuster and expanded the Supreme Court, because there were, multiple problems with the way the Republicans took control of the Supreme Court, with the whole like holding the Scalia nomination till after the end of the Obama presidency and rushing through the replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And then I've talked so much about Brett Kavanaugh and why he lied his way onto the Supreme Court, and I made multiple videos about that. But I'm going way off on a tangent now on something that isn't even the topic of today's video, so I'm going to get back to the topic of today's video. I just wanted to say that I have a lot of problems with the Supreme Court, and maybe this whole thing about agency non-acquiescence for the lowest level federal court judge, like the only federal judge in Amarillo, Texas. I mean, it arguably it is reasonable to like not comply with that level order, especially when it's so bogus, although I still have misgivings about that. But the Fifth Circuit's going to rule, and the Supreme Court ruling, I don't think the federal government, the Department of Housing and Health and Human Services, that Javier Becerra heads, should not comply with the ruling of a federal court. And anyway, I've talked way too much about that last clip, I guess, but went off on some kind of weird rant there. But now I'm going to get to a couple Fox News bias clips. The first one is, I told you they didn't even really cover the mifepristone court ruling on Fox News Sunday in their news summary. The first time they got to it was all the way at the end of talking about the Afghanistan withdrawal for a long time with Lindsey Graham. And then at the very end of the interview, like, they apologize. You'll see at the beginning of this clip, Shannon Bream actually apologizes that we're not going to keep talking about Afghanistan. Sorry, but we'll talk about it again more later. And then ask him about the dueling court rulings, because there was a more liberal judge in Washington appointed by Obama who ruled that the FDA couldn't outlaw or couldn't change the way that they couldn't revoke the status of mifepristone in like the 17 states and District of Columbia that sued over in that district. But anyway, there's so many problems with Lindsey Graham's answer. One thing, she doesn't really talk about mifepristone and how it's a majority of abortions, and how, the miso combination, mifepristone, misoprostol combination, it's only for the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. And in this clip, Lindsey Graham is going to say he is in favor of allowing abortion up to 15 weeks. So this whole ruling is within abortions that Lindsey Graham is not opposed to. Shannon Bream never brings that up, lets him get away with multiple other. One other thing he says in here that I hear over and over again from Republicans is, when they talk about like a 15-week ban, which is like longer than so many European countries. And the thing about that, I mean, it's sort of kind of true, but the thing is, the European countries that have the lower levels of abortion, below 15 weeks, they also have much broader exceptions, including like economic reasons or psychological reasons, things that Lindsey Graham would never accept. And he also talks about abortion all the way up to birth. When, Democrats, that's only when it's like medically necessary. There are very few late-term abortions that occur in the United States. And when they do occur, it's usually because the baby that is about to be born is already dead, or will die very soon after birth, or will kill the mother. I mean, there's the reason those abortions occur are very rare and based on medical necessity, no follow. I think I've totally pre-criticized this clip, but I'll talk about it a little more anyway after we watch it together over here.
9/11.
Okay, we're going to talk a lot more about Afghanistan later on in the show, but before you go, I want to talk to you about the issue of abortion. We've got two federal judges. There are dueling rulings on the pill that's been used in abortions approved by the FDA more than 20 years ago. It's an issue that's been a struggle for Republicans post-Dobbs, that ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade. You're very passionate about this, but critics, including conservatives, say it's costing the Republican Party. Kim Strassel, writing in the Wall Street Journal, an opinion piece, says conservatives need to decide if they want GOP majorities that will enact common sense protections or Democratic takeovers that will open the abortion floodgates. That's the choice. How much clearer can voters make it? Isn't that what happened this week in Wisconsin, where the pro-choice candidate won by 10 points, getting a seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court?
Well, I'm very pro-life, and I think being pro-life is a winning message. I oppose late-term abortions. I have a bill to set a national minimum standard of 15 weeks. 50 of the 53 European nations ban abortion at 15 weeks. I have an exception for rape, incest, and life of the mother. In Wisconsin, you had an 1840 statute that banned abortion pretty much across the board, and the Republican Party did not put an alternative on the table. If you're pro-life, you need to explain what that means. Here's what it means to me. I want to protect as many babies as possible. I want exceptions for pregnancies as a result of rape, incest. If the life of the mother's in jeopardy, then the family can decide. I do believe in common sense restrictions on abortion. That's where America's at. The Democratic solution when it comes to abortion is taxpayer-funded abortion up to the moment of birth. That's barbaric. That's like China. That's like North Korea. We can win this issue at the ballot box if we show up with reasonable positions. If we have our head in the sand, we're going to lose.
All right, Senator Graham, we will talk about that with the panel as well. Thank you for your time. A happy Easter to you.
And yeah, I'm about to show you a clip from the panel, and I pretty much pre-criticized that clip, although one thing I forgot to say is that they asked him about something said in an article in the Wall Street Journal, which of course is owned by News Corp, Rupert Murdoch, the same company that owns Fox News. They hardly ever mention that unless they're talking about that Wall Street Journal reporter arrested in Russia. Then they always make sure they mention that that's our sister publication or whatever. And that always happens. And Did you notice the other thing I forgot to mention that in Lindsey Graham's answer that deserved cross-examination and got none from Shannon Bream is he says, well, if the life of the mother is threatened, then the family can decide. The family? The family? I mean, he can't even talk about giving women the right to decide. That was like a total tell that Shannon Bream didn't follow up on. I definitely, what do you mean the family can decide? Shouldn't the woman be the one who has a right to decide? And anyway, the next clip is the only real discussion of the Mixup ruling in Amarillo, Texas, from radical Trump judge Matthew Kacsmaryk, that in the panel discussion, and you'll see they have like one person on the left. It's Juan Williams, who's like barely on the left, but at least he points out that they went to Amarillo, Texas, because there was this one radical Trump judge. And they try to say that it's like going and filing in the Ninth Circuit for liberals. But the Ninth Circuit is the largest circuit in the United States. If any circuit should be like the representative circuit, it's the Ninth Circuit. And it's not like when you file in the Ninth Circuit, there's some place where you can go where there's only one judge you're going to get, and you know who that judge is, like they did in Amarillo, Texas. And then finally, Trump appointed a lot of judges to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit isn't so... I talked years ago about how the Ninth Circuit was never all that liberal in terms of their rate of getting overruled by the Supreme Court wasn't that much out of the ordinary, but today it's even less so. And I don't know why it's almost like Juan Williams gets booed here after listening to Mark Thiessen, who is a total right-wing Republican hack, try to justify all this over in this clip.
Well, and on the issue of abortion, the Federalist had an interesting piece that they say that the GOP has to control messaging on abortion, but not run away from it. They say Republican politicians who boldly went on offense by passing pro-life legislation and allying themselves with grassroots activists for the unborn successfully warded off legal and political challenges in the fall of 2022. And as a result, they were rewarded with double-digit victories. Mark, they talk about Ohio, Florida, Texas. So is it go harder on the messaging or leave it alone and worry about Wisconsin happening?
Well, let's go smarter. I mean, every governor who signed an abortion restriction won in 2022. And they're the people who are directly responsible for these policies. I have skepticism that like a low turnout, off-month election in Wisconsin is a bellwether for the Republican Party. If you look at the polling, Harvard Capps poll, 72% of Americans support restricting abortion to 15 weeks or less, including 60% supermajority of Democrats. So most Americans are not for the democratic orthodoxy of abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. When Republicans, as long as there's a safe harbor that you don't want to ban all abortion, but you want to have reasonable restrictions, it's a winning issue for Republicans. It's only when the Democrats portray them as being against any exceptions that it becomes a political
problem. Well, when
they
go judge shopping in Texas for a drug that's been available for 20 years with almost no problem, and the judge says, oh yeah, this is, it looks like they want to ban abortion totally, and that's a loser politically, not only with suburban women, but I think Americans overall say abortion should be legal.
Juan, would you say, though, there was judge shopping in the case that came out of Washington State?
No, I wouldn't.
It's only judge shopping when nothing gets
Allow me just to say there was only one judge in that area, one federal judge. They went to that area with that specific intent to find a judge, a Trump appointee with a long history of being opposed to abortion.
I will tell you, I've seen a lot of cases filed in the Ninth Circuit for that very reason.
Well, you could say it's a liberal court, but I'm talking about one judge alone.
I gotcha. Okay, we got to leave it there. But now that you're warmed up, panel, stay put.
Anyway, that was like the extent of the Fox News panel discussion. I pretty much pre-criticized the way they piled on to Juan Williams for telling the truth about the forum shopping, the judge shopping. They filed it in Amarillo, Texas, where there is only one federal judge, this guy Matthew Kacsmaryk, who I put in my thumbnail, who made this radical ruling. But they, just like Lindsey Graham in the previous clip, they let Mark Thiessen get away with saying, reasonable restrictions on abortion, and Lindsey Graham had said 15 weeks. And like I said, the misoprostol combination for medical abortion is only prescribed up to 10 weeks. 10 weeks is the maximum for that, and it's a majority of U.S. abortions in 10 weeks, well within Lindsey Graham's 15 weeks, within Mark Thiessen's reasonable restrictions. So why aren't the Republicans, who are apparently in favor of reasonable restrictions on abortion, outraged by this one federal judge outlawing abortions that only take place up to 10 weeks? 10 weeks. That didn't really come up in any of the news coverage, that these are abortions that take place in the first 10 weeks. And anyway, the other criticism I have of Fox News and of ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos is their only coverage of this issue was had to do with the political impact. At least CNN's State of the Union and NBC News's Meet the Press had a little discussion of the actual effect. NBC News Meet the Press in their news summary talked about how a majority of U.S. abortions would be outlawed by this ruling. And then you saw Javier Becerra and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez kind of debating the policy back and forth. But Fox News Sunday and ABC really focused just on the political impact, and you saw that in that last clip. And then here's the panel discussion with Rick Klein and Leanne Caldwell and Chris Christie, all talking about the political impact more than the impact on all these women who are used to being able to take the most safe, effective drugs for medical abortions early in their pregnancies, who are possibly going to be banned from doing that as early as this Friday. But anyway, here's the ABC discussion that I'll talk about a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Wisconsin was a big wake-up call for Republicans on that. I mean, you had obviously it's not technically a partisan race, but the candidate supported by Democrats winning by 11 points in Wisconsin, and then after that, you have this decision on the abortion pill.
Yeah, think about what it means to win by double digits in Wisconsin. I mean, when Donald Trump won that state, he won it by about 0.7%. When Joe Biden flipped it, I think it was 0.6%. So to win by 11% is insane. Yeah. That is an absolute blowout. And it was clear the abortion ruling from the 19th century was either going to or not going to go into effect in all likelihood based on this. And yes, I think we are still...
From the 19th century.
That's right. We're still only beginning to understand the real potency of the overturning of Roe v. Wade from more than a year ago. The idea that we're going to have another abortion-related case before the Supreme Court potentially after the ruling out of Texas, it brings it back front and center. And I think Karen is right to tie it together with the battles over democracy. These are the kind of stakes that are shaking up early. Governor Christie's right. We're a long way from an actual campaign. But if you look at the atmosphere, if you look at the issues that are going to be driving voters in a major way, these are a lot of things that Democrats like the playing field on.
And Republicans will tell the Dobbs decision hurt them in the midterms.
Absolutely.
So how big is this decision on the abortion pill?
Well, their silence is deafening. We are hearing
the Republican
Republican silence is deafening. We've heard a lot from Democrats decrying this case, and you have not heard a lot from Republicans. Even Republican sources that I have reached out to in preparation for this show, asking them to talk to me about this case and what the implications are politically, and I've heard nothing. And so that is a real big sign that Republicans are actually worried about this. It was abortion, and directly in some instances, an abortion and Donald Trump, who lost Republicans the Senate in 2022 and gave Republicans a very slim majority in the House when they were expected to blow
Well, we have a Republican sitting right over there who usually isn't very silent. So what's your take on it?
I'd say a few things, because there's a lot in there from what everybody said. First off, on the decision itself, I've always been of the view, I'm pro-life, but I've always been of the view that these things should be decided by the states. And state by state, these decisions should be made. So I don't favor federalizing this in any way, whether it's by a federal court or whether it's by the Congress or whether it's by some presidential executive order. I think this should be a state by state determination. And we saw in Wisconsin that people made decisions. Yep. We saw that in Kansas, that folks made decisions, right? So these are going to be state by state decisions that are made, and we should respect those decisions that are made by people of those states. And I think that's what Republicans should be saying, that these should be state-by-state decisions. I'd also say about gerrymandering that where you stand depends on where you sit. You know, in New York, the gerrymandering was so bad that you didn't even need a Republican majority on the state court of appeals, that 6 out of 7 were Democrats, and they overturned the New York map. And now what do you see? You see Kathy Hochul in the legislature trying to change the rules to give the Supreme Court, they don't like that, or not the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals in New York, which is their highest court. They want to give them new members and other authority so that they can overturn and bring back their gerrymandered map. Both parties engage in that kind of stuff. So in the end, John, I'd say this, that I still think that while Dobbs had an impact on 2022, no question, the bigger impact were the Donald Trump endorsements and the awful candidates, whether it was Kari Lake or Herschel Walker or Tim Michels in Wisconsin or Mastriano in Pennsylvania. Those were the candidates that lost, and they were Donald Trump's candidates.
But they were also election denied.
Yeah, I don't know. Is Chris Christie right? Is it like election deniers hurt Republicans more than abortion in the midterms in 2022? I don't know. I'm just glad that the Republicans are so radical that they're having these problems, I guess. And the thing is that when abortion is on the ballot, it tends to really skew elections in favor of Democrats. In Kansas, you saw that. In Wisconsin, you saw that. And I'm about to show the NBC News Meet the Press data downloaded regarding Wisconsin. And you heard Rick Klein in the first of those pundit comments in that last clip say that, the Wisconsin Supreme Court went liberal instead of conservative because of an 11-point win by the liberal running for Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Janet Protasewicz, or whatever. I'm sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing her name, but it was really important win for the first time in 15, 16 years. The Wisconsin Supreme Court has a liberal majority. It's going to deal with gerrymandering like Chris Christie was talking about. And then also you saw Leanne Caldwell in the middle there saying how Republicans don't even want to talk about the abortion issue. And I think that kind of explains what you saw on Fox News Sunday, where they didn't mention it till like the very end of the Lindsey Graham interview. And then like 40 minutes or so into the program, they had a panel discussion, never really talking about it with their newsmakers or their newsmaker interviews, other than that brief Lindsey Graham question. And on Fox News today, Monday, I was watching, and like their first news program, America's Newsroom, with Bill Hemmer and Dana Perino, I don't think it was them. Dana Perino was off this week, but anyway, they waited till like over an hour into the program to briefly talk about the mifepristone case. And so, yeah, I think Leanne Caldwell is right. Republicans don't even want to talk about the issue, and they're hoping it will go away, but they created this problem by stacking the Supreme Court with these anti-abortion zealots by, stealing the Scalia appointment from Obama, pushing through Amy Coney Barrett even faster than they waited after Scalia, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and then Brett Kavanaugh being appointed after lying to the Senate about certainly about his drinking at Yale, and possibly about sexually assaulting people at Yale, and the FBI didn't investigate because the Trump White House told them not to. I'm not going off on that rant again. I did that earlier. I'm almost done here. So, yeah, I only have one more clip, and it is actually NBC News Meet the Press doing like a deep dive into the politics of this Wisconsin Supreme Court race and how it was affected by the abortion issue. Like I said, Rick Klein in that last clip was saying that like Trump won Wisconsin by less than 1%, and then Biden flipped it. That's in 2016. Then Biden flipped it in 2020, winning it by less than 1%. But this liberal Supreme Court justice won it by 11%. And that's because abortion is just energizing, especially young people. But anyway, I'll talk about that last fact after we watch Chuck Todd's data download talking about the Wisconsin race, and then the Michigan race, and other, multiple races where abortion has really energized the Democrats and the liberals, and it's bad news for Republicans, which I'll talk about a little more after we watch that final clip together over here.
Welcome back. Data download time. By electing Janet Protasiewicz to the state Supreme Court this week, Wisconsin voters handed liberals their first majority on the court in 15 years, and it gives them the power to decide the fate of many pivotal issues in the state. Of most central, of course, to the campaign was abortion rights. So how did this issue deliver the rare double-digit victory for the left in a perpetual battleground state and the most polarized state in the Union of Wisconsin? Let me show you, because it's not a story that just stays in Wisconsin. Look, here's the 2020 presidential map there. Biden carried 14 counties. Here's the Supreme Court map. Protasiewicz carried 23 counties. And look where it is. Any urban area essentially became an abortion rights supporter here. Kenosha, she carried. This is where La Crosse is. This is where Green Bay is. These are areas Joe Biden couldn't carry. The old days, Democrats used to carry those areas, but not anymore. But they did for this issue. Let me show you Kansas. We had 5 counties that Biden carried in Kansas. The abortion referendum in August of 22 showed you other urban and suburban areas also supported abortion rights. Wichita, Topeka, Kansas City suburbs, you can see. Michigan had an abortion referendum along with the governor's race. Again, here's the map of Joe Biden, and look at the map of the abortion referendum. Basically, in each case, wherever there's a college town, wherever there's even a small-sized city, the abortion rights side seem to do well. We see it in Michigan, we see it in Wisconsin, and we saw it in Kansas. Then there's the issue of turnout. This is the Wisconsin Supreme Court election. 2019, they had one of these in the spring, 1.2 million votes. 2023, 1.8 million voters. The biggest difference, Dane County and the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Young voters turned out in droves. That made the difference. When we come back, it was overshadowed by the spectacle of Donald Trump's surrender at a New York City.
So yeah, there you see it. The NBC News Meet the Press focus on the political impact of the abortion issue. At least has some data behind it in the data download, unlike the pundits in the previous 2 clips. But I don't know. I mean, they kind of all together create a real expectation that the abortion issue is going to be bad news for Republicans for years to come. And this ruling out of Texas, whether it goes in, if it goes into effect this week, if a majority of U.S. abortions are outlawed by this radical Trump judge this week, I think that Republicans will rue the day that they were able to get the legal authority in the courts to have this momentary victory that's going to lead to a much more permanent defeat in the future. That's my commentary and criticism. I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out and the commentary and criticism I added to it. I do appreciate all of you who joined me for the live show and the live comments that you posted that I was mostly able to read. I also appreciate the viewers of the recorded show, and for the recorded show viewers, if you post a comment, especially if you disagree with me, I will probably have time to respond to you. I did that I got some criticism on my Wednesday special media mix-up on the Trump arraignment, and I responded to someone who criticized me, and then I guess my response was so good there was no reason to respond, because I remain undefeated in the comment section from Wednesday. So I will try to be able to also defend everything I said in this live stream in the recorded show comment section. If that's something you want to engage in, I will do it there. And I also especially want to thank the Super Chat contributors for this show, Lulu Girl, Persuasive Barrier, and Kettle. I really appreciate that because, like I said, I've already been demonetized by YouTube. I appealed it. Maybe they'll allow me to be monetized sometime soon. You never know. But anyway, I will be back next Monday and every Monday through the 2024 election cycle, sometime in the afternoon Pacific time, unless I have some reason to upload some other video between now and next Monday. But if not, I guess I'll see you next Monday for my media mix-up. And until then, I will be seeing all of you around the internet.